Chances are you've been told that being able to spot reduce body fat or picking and choosing where your body fat loss comes from is impossible. But what I'm about to tell you might actually change your stance on that position. See, recently, a team of researchers out of the University of Rome actually wanted to test out whether or not that's actually the case. So what they did is they put them on a unique routine of combining resistance training followed by endurance training in the hopes of potentially spot reducing body fat. So let me just give you a little bit of background into what's going on here, what they used, and why they decided to do what they did. So what they did is they had these subjects train for 12 weeks, 3 times per week. What they did is on one day they would train primarily upper body, and then they would follow that training session with 30 minutes of cardio. On the other days, they would do leg focus work. So they would resistance train their lower limbs, and then they would do cardio again. The main reason why you would think about doing this, so consider cardio. Cardio is very optimized for metabolizing body fat or free fatty acids while you're actually training. That's one of the reasons why many people, walk on a treadmill for a long period of time, especially when they're fasted, under the pretense that theoretically doing so should maximize fat burning during the training session. Okay, but there's a little bit of a problem with that, is that you're just really burning that fat during the session. So maybe let's say you have, you're just doing an hour long of cardio. You're essentially burning fat for around an hour, and then unfortunately you have like a decrease in energy expenditure later in the day, such as like a reduction of exercise activity thermogenesis, otherwise known as NEAT, kind of like, fidgeting or standing up, walking around, all those calories that you're burning when you're not thinking about burning calories. But the way that they did this exact training protocol is they were using the theoretical approach that by using resistance training, you're releasing free fatty acids into the bloodstream, just as a byproduct of muscle contraction, and the need for energy during those sets. So there's this idea of training to increase things like catecholamine output, like adrenaline, epinephrine, norepinephrine. These things act on fat cells to release the contained fatty acids into the bloodstream for metabolism. So theoretically what's happening here is you're resistance training certain body parts, and then so thus you're releasing fatty acids into the bloodstream, and then you're following it up with an activity that's optimized for burning fat. So essentially you have an elevation in fatty acids in the blood, and then you go and do cardio and burn off those fatty acids. What they actually found in this study is that this actually panned out. So when subjects were training with primarily upper body stuff and then doing cardio afterwards, they were observing a reduction of body fat specifically in the upper arms. Now, in the other group, when they were training specifically for legs and then doing cardio, they were losing body fat in their legs primarily, which is really interesting because, the group who was training legs wasn't seeing a reduction of body fat globally. They weren't seeing a reduction of body fat in their upper bodies. And the same goes for the upper body resistance training group. They were not seeing reductions of body fat in their lower limbs, which leads me to believe that they were potentially spot reducing their body fat. Okay. The cool thing about this is that this method of training is actually one that I've been trying to promote for quite some time, just more so from the perspective of a global approach. So I've always really enjoyed the idea of first doing high intensity interval training, doing something like wind gates or using battle ropes or, sprinting on a bike or sprinting on a treadmill or just sprinting in general, doing these high intensity activities to theoretically increase output of those catecholamines that I mentioned, which theoretically should release fatty acids into the bloodstream, and then you can metabolize them by using a longer duration cardio session after your training. Now, it's important to remember that this information is very on the fringe. Up until information like this, it's been pretty widely considered to be impossible to spot reduced body fat. But it's very important to remember with information like this that it at least opens up the possibility. And really, I'm not super surprised. Theoretically, this makes a lot of sense. You're moving certain parts of your body which are going to have both a systemic and a local response. So you're going to have a local response in the areas that you're training. That's why when you do shoulder workouts and then eat appropriately and recover, you see an increase in shoulder musculature, but you don't necessarily see an increase in leg size. While that's like somewhat of a ridiculous example, it still kind of paints a picture of what I'm trying to say here, that there can be a localized response in the body specifically where you're training. So it doesn't really surprise me that this is potentially a possibility. In using this in your training, you'll have to remember that this could potentially take a very long time. So you're not going to, do an upper body workout, do a cardio session, and then all of a sudden begin seeing more definition in your pecs or your shoulders or whatever you're trying to work. You have to remember that this is no different than any other practice and that you have to consistently do this. What I would suggest doing is first utilizing the total body approach, okay? Do HIIT training first, wait 10, 15 minutes, and then do long duration cardio. Excuse me. And just see how that works out for you. From there, once you figure out a good routine of doing that, you can start to incorporate this potential spot reduction. So you can, potentially try and do an upper body workout or a lower body workout and then do, cardio afterwards. You just have to remember that to actually have this pan out, you're probably going to need to do it a lot. And you'll have to do it consistently, just like with any other thing like I mentioned, okay? So, like I said, this is very theoretical, but the evidence, at least in this paper, seems logical and rational, and in my opinion, makes sense. It makes sense that this is a possibility. So, will this change the idea of spot reducing body fat for everyone? Probably not. And I don't know if there will ever be a replicated study of this sort. But if there is, I would assume that if the level of control was similar, that you'd probably see something similar. So I hope that this information interested you. If it did and you think that this could actually help you, consider giving this video a like. If you really enjoy this content and want to see more of it, consider subscribing. And then that way you get notified every time I upload a video. So I think that about wraps it up. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll talk to you next time.